Hello, we are going to be talking about the nervous system today. We're going to break this up into three different kind of note sessions. So this is not so unbearable for you guys. It's not a hard lesson at all, but it is a very important one in our body. We'll start off by talking about the basic functions of the nervous system. The main thing is that it regulates and integrates the activities of all the different parts of the body. And there's three main functions. There's a sensory function, a motor function, and an integrative function. The sensory function is going to receive the stimuli. So sensory receptors gather the information like light, sound, temperature, oxygen levels, and they sense the certain changes of that stimuli inside and outside of the body. It will then carry the information to the central nervous system. The motor functions is what's going to react to the stimuli. So decisions are acted upon here. Impulses are carried to the effectors, like the muscles and the glands, and it's going to respond to the stimuli by initiating muscular contractions or glandular secretions. The last function is the integrative function. This is what's going to actually decide about the stimuli. So it's going to analyze the sensory information, it's going to store it, it's going to make decisions regarding what appropriate behaviors should be acted on. And we are going to make conscious and subconscious decisions based on the information that is received. So as we go through this unit, you're going to see how this function of regulating and integrating the activities of all the different parts of our body happen. The organs of the nervous system consist of the brain, okay, and we're going to talk about that. The spinal cord, again, we're going to talk about all of that and learn all the different parts, and the different nerves. And with the nerves, we're going to do a nerve exploration where you're going to explore the different nerves and their functions. Now, there are two main nerve cells that carry out all of the different functions. We have neurons, and if you can see here, there's a lot of different branches that occur so we can receive all types of stimuli. And then we have a variety of supporting cells or neuroglia, and they are specific to the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is the nerves. So let's chat now about the nerve cells. We're going to talk first about a neuron. Now, the neuron is the main structural and functional unit of the nervous system. They're often called nerve fibers, and they are so plentiful. The body contains more than 100 billion neurons, and no two neurons are exactly alike. Okay. Now, only 10% of the cells in our nervous system are going to be the neurons. So the supporting cells are going to be more numerous than that. And it's pretty impressive seeing that there's more than 100 billion neurons in our body. Okay. Now, what's kind of cool about the neurons is they can live a long time. They have extreme longevity. They can function over 100 years. Now, as far as their function goes, they are specialized to react to the physical and chemical changes in their surroundings. And that's what's actually going to transmit the actual signals along the pathways of the nervous system. So they're specialized for conducting messages in the form of impulses from one part of the body to another. And this message can be sent at speeds of 100 meters per second, which is about 225 miles per hour. That is insane. Now, they are the longest cells of the body, and we're going to learn about all the different parts in a second. And I want to point out that they are not capable of undergoing mitosis or cell division. So, damage to neurons is not good at all. So, this is the basic structure of a neuron. And we're going to talk in specifically about the soma or cell body. We'll talk about the axon, and we'll also talk about these dendrites. So the cell body is often called the soma. This is the rounded area of the neuron, and this is what is going to contain cytoplasm, which is pretty granular. It's going to contain the organelles. It's going to contain the cell membrane. Now, the organelles have a little bit of different names. The Nissl body, that is the ER, okay, and that's found throughout the cytoplasm, just like in the animal cells. Ribosomes are going to attach right to that Nissl body. We also have neurofibrils, and those are the intermediate filaments that are going to provide support and shape to the cell. It does have a pretty large spherical nucleus, and when we talk about the function of the cell body, or the soma, S-O-M-A, we're going to say it's the metabolic center of the cell. It is the site where most of the material contents of the cell are contained. And if you can see in the picture that I just put up, it looks just like a typical animal cell. And again, the cell body is that rounded area. Next up is the dendrites. Now, the dendrites have numerous minuscule extensions that enumerate out of the cell body. They're tubular and they are filled with cytoplasm. They also contain the mitochondria. Now, they're usually very short and highly branched. This is actually going to increase the surface area of that neuron, where it can receive all types of stimuli for the neuron. Now, it is going to be receiving incoming information from the external sources, typically neurons, and it is not what we call myelinated. And we're going to talk about myelination in a minute. Myelination is kind of like an insulation that will cover, and we'll see in many parts, the axon. You can see here in the picture that the dendrites are very numerous. They're small, they're branched, very different than the singular axon. So the axon is the long, almost tail of the neuron. It is a single, a very more prominent extension from that cell body. And its main thing is to send information or impulses through the nerve away from the cell body. Now, it does contain mitochondria, microtubules, the neurofibrils, which are the intermediate filaments, cytoplasm, and pretty much it is going to be just a single structure. Just to kind of give you an idea, the sciatic nerve in your leg has axons that extend all the way from the lower part of your spinal cord to muscles in the lower leg and foot. This is about 1 meter long for this axon length. Now, it can give off little side branches. They're called collaterals. And those collaterals can branch off to thousands of synaptic terminals. So you can see the axon is very long. Now, axons can be myelinated or unmyelinated, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So just so you see the whole structure of a neuron, you see we have a cell body, or a soma. The dendrites are those numerous little extensions. And then you have your axon. Now, this is showing you one that's been myelinated. This one has the protective insulation. And it does branch off into little collaterals that have some axon terminals. Now, the axon hillock is what's kind of going to join the axon to the cell body. The initial segment is the first segment. And when we talk about the cytoplasm of an axon, we call it axoplasm. And if we talk about the cell membrane of an axon, we're going to call it axolemma. Okay. And again, this is kind of showing you all the different parts again, and gives you a little bit of I know it's a little blurry, I apologize, but it kind of gives you a little bit more of a function and a structure picture. What you're seeing is a little different here is we're seeing these little nodes of Ranvier. These are little narrow gaps that occur between these Schwann cells. Now, Schwann cells is what's going to help with the myelin sheath. It's going to be enclosing the axon. So the nodes of Ranvier help speed up nerve impulses along the axon. It's kind of almost like a leapfrog mechanism. The impulse is going to jump from Schwann cell to Schwann cell. And the myelin sheath that you're seeing, this is an insulating layer again, and that's formed by Schwann cells. And it kind of functions as like a living electrical tape. Lipids in the cell membrane are very poor conductors of the electricity, so that's why the myelin sheath is needed. It's kind of the electrical insulation on an axon. So one of the things about the central nervous system neurons, when they are damaged, they do not regenerate. Okay, if nerves, peripheral nerves, are damaged, their axons can regenerate, and that's because the structure of their cell membrane or their neurolemma. Now, neurons can vary in very much different ways. They can vary in function, and this is what we are going to be talking about in a minute. They can be varying in their size and the shape. They can vary in the number of axons and dendrites they contain. But right now, we're going to talk a little bit about how they vary structurally. So you can see this picture. We have bipolar neurons, unipolar, and multipolar. Now, the bipolar neurons have two processes that extend from the cell body. So it's axon and dendrites extend. These are typically found in the neurons in your eyes, the ears, and your nose. Now, the unipolar is very different because it only has one process extending from the cell body. Now, it's going to branch off. We're going to have one that's going to be associated with the peripheral part, which are nerves, and we're going to have one that's going to branch off to go to the brain and the spinal cord. Cell bodies of these neurons aggregate into special masses called ganglia. And this is kind of important in our body. Now, the multipolar is where 99% of the neurons fall into. Many processes are going to extend from that cell body. You have one axon, and then the rest are going to be the dendrites. And again, this is the most numerous of the central nervous system. You can just see here a little bit about now the functional differences that we have. Okay, so we have sensory neurons. These are called afferent neurons, AFFERENT. These are what's going to carry impulses to the central nervous system. They have specialized receptor ends at the tips of those dendrites, and they also kind of associate them deeper with receptor cells of the skin and organs. They're mostly unipolar, but some can be bipolar in structure, and they're going to communicate information about the external and internal environment from sensory receptors to the central nervous system. Now, the interneurons here are associated neurons or internuncial neurons. That's another name for them. These are the neurons that are found in the brain or the spinal cord. These are very much multipolar in fashion, and they're going to transmit impulses from two parts of the brain or spinal cord to another. Some interneurons aggregate in masses, again, similar to ganglia, and they are going to integrate the sensory and motor input. So it's kind of the integrative function. Now, the motor neurons, those are called efferent neurons, EFFERENT. These are multipolar, and they're going to carry impulses away from the central nervous system to the effector cells. This is what's going to stimulate muscles to contract and glands to release their secretions. That is it for the neuron. Does anyone have any questions? Just let me know in class tomorrow. We're now going to finish up this section of notes with the neuroglia. These are the supporting cells of the nervous system. Again, these are about 5 to 50 times more numerous than neurons in the body. They're smaller, but they are what we call supporting cells. They're often called glia or glial cells. Now, these cells can multiply and divide, very much unlike the neurons. They are going to provide support, physical support, insulation, and nutrients for the neurons. They don't actually conduct the nerve impulses. That's the job of the neurons. But they have a lot of function to do. Like they're going to isolate and protect the cell membrane for the neurons. They're going to provide a supporting framework for the neural tissue. They're going to regulate the composition of the matrix. They're going to act as phagocytes that are going to defend the neural tissue from pathogens and assist in the repair from injuries. So they're very helpful in the nervous system. Now, we are going to chat about 6 different types. There are 4 that are prominent in the central nervous system, and there are 2 that are prominent in the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is the nerves. So let's start talking about these cells. First off is the microglia. These are scattered throughout the central nervous system, and they are pretty much made up of macrophages. They, again, are supporting the neurons, and their main thing is to phagocytize bacteria and inviting microbes and the cellular debris from the dead cells. So they'll actually go to the injured site to clean up, and they're going to take care of the brain. They're going to keep it free of disease. They normally are stationary, but they can migrate again to that site of injury. Astrocytes are found in the central nervous system between the neurons and the blood vessels. They have numerous radiating projections, and the bulbs are going to allow it to cling to neurons and the blood supply. It's going to help anchor those neurons. And they are going to encircle the capillaries of the brain, which helps contribute to the blood-brain barrier, which the blood-brain barrier is going to restrict the passage of most substances into the brain. It is going to provide structural support. It's going to help join parts because of all those abundant cell processes. It helps regulate the concentrations of nutrients and ions within the tissue, which is then going to help induce synapse formation. It also is going to be responsible for neurotransmitter substances. It's going to help make them, and it's going to help kind of sop up the excess neurotransmitters. It does form scar tissue that will fill spaces following injury to the central nervous system. And it is going to provide a metabolic and structural support directly to the neuron. So it's pretty important. The oligodendrocytes are smaller than the astrocytes, and they have fewer processes. This is what's going to align along the neurons or the nerve fibers. And it is going to provide insulating layers of myelin around axons of the brain and the spinal cord. It is going to help produce that thick neuron fiber. The ependymal cells are squamous and columnar in fashion, and many of them are ciliated. They are going to be arranged in a single layer. This is going to form a membrane that covers the brain parts and the inner linings that enclose the spaces within the brain and the spinal cord. It's going to help in circulating the cerebral spinal fluid, and again, it's more of a lining function. Now, the Schwann cells are in the peripheral nervous system, or the nerves. And this is going to form a myelin sheath around those axons in the nerves. It is going to help speed up neurotransmissions, again, and that's going to be shown in a little bit when we talk about that process. And it's going to be mostly plasma membrane with very little cytoplasm. But we call it a chain of supporting cells that enclose the axon. They kind of wrap themselves around the axons, forming like a layered jacket of cell membranes, which is the myelin sheath. It does form a supporting network, kind of twines around neurons, and Schwann cells can act as phagocytes. Now, the last one we're going to talk about are the satellite cells. These are in the peripheral nervous system, and they're going to support clusters of neuron cell bodies, or the ganglia. It's going to help control the chemical environment associated with the Schwann cells. Okay. If you have any questions, please let me know. This diagram just kind of shows you the different types, shows you the picture, and it also shows you the function. And then we have another one that's just kind of showing you how they're all connected together and how they're doing their actual supporting system of the neuron. And this is just a recap of what we have just talked about. The neuron with its dendrite, cell body, and axon. And then we have the neuroglia cells, or the glia cells with the ependymial, astrocytes, microglia, oligodendrocytes, Schwann cells, satellite cells. If you have any questions, please let me know.